Officer Camden Bradley, at 24, was Macon's golden child. Award-winning officer, former star quarterback, and possessor of a physique he'd gladly explain was this close to NFL material before that tragic ACL injury. He was beloved in town, especially by the older women who pinched his cheeks, and the younger men who dreamed of his gridiron glory. But Camden had bigger aspirations than local fame. He wanted Cassidy. Cassidy was the town enigma, a salt and pepper-haired man with a tire shop and a pub. Everyone knew he was the one moving weight. And Cassidy also had a daughter, Lilian. With her dark hair and emerald eyes, she was a vision. A fleeting beauty who managed Cassidy's books at the shop. Sometimes, she'd work the bar at the pub on a slow night. A fixed figure in the community, yet no one really knew her. No one seemed able to get close. Cruising down Main Street, Officer Bradley slowed as he passed Cassidy's tires. He cast a practiced glance towards the dusty windows, hoping to catch a glimpse of Lilian. But no luck today. Just the usual stack of worn tires and a faint smell of rubber. Having just gone off duty, Camden sauntered into the Pick and Pocket, Cassidy's pub. The air was thick with the scent of stale beer and simmering resentment. Cassidy stood behind the bar, polishing a glass. "Evening, Camden," Cassidy greeted, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Officer Bradley," Camden corrected automatically, taking a seat. "Just making my rounds, keeping Macon safe." Cassidy chuckled, pouring him a beer. "Always diligent, Camden. That's why they gave you that medal, right? I heard it was for saving Mrs. Henderson's cat from a tree." Camden bristled. It was a rescue operation, and Mrs. Henderson was very grateful. And it's Officer Bradley. "Of course, Officer Bradley," Cassidy said smoothly, sliding the beer across the counter. "So, what brings you in tonight, besides the thrill of law enforcement?" Camden leaned forward, casually swirling the beer. "Just curious, Cassidy. Where were you last night? Say between 10 p.m. and midnight." Cassidy paused, considering. He began wiping down the counter with exaggerated care. "Last night, let's see. Around 10, I was probably balancing the books from the tire shop. By 11, I was here, enjoying a quiet drink. And by midnight, I was tucked in my bed, dreaming of balancing said books." Camden raised an eyebrow. "Anyone who can confirm that?" Cassidy grinned. Does a man need a witness to his own life, Camden? Besides, if I had to write a book on my life, it would be a lonely book. Oh, unless it's a coloring book with an awful lot of coloring between the lines. Camden couldn't help but laugh. Cassidy's wit was disarming, even when he knew the man was lightly lying through his teeth. You're a character, Cassidy, that's for sure. Someone has to be, Camden. This town is full of cardboard cutouts. Cassidy winked. Now, is there anything else I can get for you, Officer Bradley? Or are you going to keep grilling me about my bedtime habits? No more questions, Camden said, taking a long swig of his beer. Just making conversation. Cassidy chuckled softly. Conversation is just a civilized form of espionage, Camden. But I suppose even spies need a drink. He paused, his eyes seeming to peer into some distant memory. It's like trying to catch smoke with a butterfly net. You might feel like you're accomplishing something, but all you're left with is frustration and the lingering scent of what you couldn't hold on to. A beat of silence hung in the air before Cassidy's expression softened slightly. How's your mother doing, Camden? I heard about your father. Terrible thing, cancer. Camden's face tightened for a fraction of a second before smoothing back into a polite mask. She's doing well, all things considered. Staying busy. Thanks for asking. His mother, Marlene Bradley, former pageant queen, a vision of southern grace and charm. She had snagged the hotshot prosecutor, Daniel Bradley, right out of law school. Daniel had risen through the ranks, becoming the deputy district attorney, a man of power and influence. He had been struck down by cancer just 6 months ago, leaving Marlene a widow. Cassidy nodded slowly, his gaze knowing. Marlene's a strong woman. Always has been. Losing Daniel must have been hard. He paused again and wiped down the counter. Yeah, well, she's handling it, Camden said curtly, a sudden coldness entering his voice. He stared at Cassidy, a flicker of a bitter memory flashing behind his eyes. The image was fleeting, but the feeling of injustice lingered. Camden pushed himself off the stool. Thanks for the beer, Cassidy. I should get going. He turned and headed toward the door, his hand already on the handle when he saw her. Lilian. She was just entering, a large canvas bag slung over her shoulder, ledgers clutched in her arms. Her eyes were fixed forward, her expression unreadable. Lilian, Camden greeted as they passed, a polite nod accompanying his words. But she didn't seem to notice him. She didn't acknowledge him, didn't even flicker an eyelash. She simply walked past, silent and ethereal, disappearing into the dim interior of the pick and pocket. Camden paused for a moment, watching her go, a mix of frustration and fascination swirling within him. Then he shook his head and stepped out into the night. Officer Bradley split his time these days. Some nights he stayed in his small townhouse, a bachelor pad with minimalist decor and a strategically placed weight bench. Other nights, like tonight, he drove to his parents' larger suburban house, a sprawling testament to Daniel's success. Tonight, the pull of familiarity and the need to comfort his mother won out. As he drove, Camden replayed the encounter with Lilian in his head. Was she truly oblivious, or was she deliberately ignoring him? And what was she carrying in that bag? The next day, the fluorescent lights of the Maycomb precinct buzzed overhead as Officer Bradley stood before Captain Reynolds' desk. The captain, a gruff man with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow, leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowed. "Bradley," he said, his voice raspy. "Marshall case, what have you got?" The Marshall case had been a thorn in the department's side for weeks. A string of seemingly random business robberies had plagued the town, starting with Marshall's Pillows, hence the name. Each robbery was clean, efficient, and left no trace. "Sir, I've been looking into Cassidy," Camden began. "He fits the profile. Known criminal history, access to resources, and a potential motive." "Cassidy? The old tire salesman?" Reynolds scoffed. "What's he got to do with stolen pillows and plastic containers?" "Sir, I interviewed him last night," Camden continued, ignoring the captain's skepticism. "Asked him about his whereabouts during the Paul's plastic containers robbery. His story doesn't quite add up." "Doesn't add up how?" "He claimed to be at the pick and pocket all night, but I had spoken to a few patrons previously, and no one remembers seeing him there after 10 o'clock. Reynolds steepled his fingers. "Circumstantial. We need more than that, Bradley. Cassidy's been a slippery fish for years. We need hard evidence, something concrete." "I understand, sir. I'm working on it." Camden paused, considering his next words. "Sir, I also observed his daughter, Lilian, entering the pub late last night with a suspicious bag and ledgers. I couldn't get a clear look at what was inside, but it seemed out of place for a late night visit. Reynolds leaned forward, his eyes glinting. The daughter, huh? Interesting. All right, Bradley. Keep digging, but stay within the lines. I don't want any harassment charges or vigilante justice. Get me something solid on Cassidy, and maybe this Marshall case will finally get solved. Camden pivoted on his heel, ready to leave the captain's office, when a thought struck him. Sir, one more thing, he said, turning back. I was wondering if I could adopt a more casual appearance for this investigation. Blend in a bit better. I know I'm not officially a detective yet, but I've been handling the duties, and a uniform might draw unnecessary attention. Reynolds waved a dismissive hand. Whatever works, Bradley. Just get the job done. You want to wear a clown suit while you're at it, knock yourself out. Just bring me results. A surge of satisfaction coursed through Camden. It wasn't a formal endorsement, but it was enough. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. He left the precinct and headed straight for his townhouse. Shedding the crisp blue uniform felt liberating. He traded the starched shirt and polished boots for a pair of worn jeans, a dark Henley shirt, and scuffed leather boots. He ran a hand through his hair, mussing it slightly, and considered ditching the buzz cut altogether. The golden boy was gone. Now he was just a guy trying to blend in. As he looked in the mirror, Camden couldn't help feel a thrill of anticipation. He was playing a different game now, one that required more finesse and less brute force, and he was ready to play. Camden climbed into his private Ford truck, a beat-up but reliable vehicle that had seen better days. It was a far cry from the polished patrol cars he usually drove, but it was perfect for his new, more discreet role. He drove straight to Cassidy's tires, pulling into the dusty parking lot. He walked into the shop, the familiar smell of rubber and motor oil filling his nostrils. A mechanic, his face smudged with grease, looked up from under the hood of the car. "Can I help you?" the mechanic asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "Yeah, my name is Camden Bradley. I'd like to book my truck in for a tire rotation," Camden said, adopting a casual tone. and I was wondering if I could discuss payment options if I go for a full set with whoever does the books. The mechanic nodded towards a door in the back. That'd be Lilian. She's around somewhere. Have a seat. Camden sat in the waiting room, trying to appear nonchalant. The room was sparsely furnished, with a couple of plastic chairs and a stack of old magazines. He could feel his pulse quickening slightly. He hadn't felt this nervous since his first high school football game. Time seemed to stretch on forever. He flipped through a magazine, pretending to read, but his mind was racing. He kept glancing towards the door, to the back, anticipating Lilian's appearance. At one point, she walked right by him, carrying a stack of invoices. She moved with a quiet grace, her dark hair cascading down her back. Again, she didn't seem to notice him, her eyes fixed on some distant point. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door opened and Lilian stood there. "Mr. Bradley," she said, her voice soft and melodic. "Please, come in." A wave of relief washed over Camden as he followed her into her office. The office was small and dusty, with random grease marks on the walls and piles of ledgers stacked on every surface. It was a chaotic space, yet somehow organized. But despite the disarray, the room smelled sweetly of strawberries and spring flowers, a surprising contrast to the gritty surroundings. Camden stepped into the office and stood there a moment, taking it all in. He didn't realize he was staring until Lilian's voice broke through his thoughts. "I heard you mention something about paying for a full set of tires," she asked, her green eyes meeting his. Camden blinked, suddenly feeling flustered. He cleared his throat. Yeah, right. I mean, yes, a full set. And, please, call me Camden." He internally cringed at his awkwardness. She tilted her head slightly, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "All right, Camden," she said, filing the name away. She never offered her name, but Camden already knew it was Lilian. "What kind of price range are you looking at for a set that suits your truck?" Even though he knew deep inside that his current tires still had plenty of miles left in them, he feigned ignorance. "Something durable, good for all kinds of weather, you know." Lilian considered for a moment. Well, we have a few options, but for your truck, I'd recommend the all-terrain Warrior. It's our most expensive, but it's top of the line. Great for off-roading and handles well in any condition. Camden attempted to play along, nodding thoughtfully. All-terrain, huh? Warrior set. Sounds tough. He feigned pondering her statement. Those might be suitable. Lilian, seemingly unfazed by his feigned ponderings, leaned forward and told him a price that had him gulping air. He stared blankly at the figure. Well, after hearing that, I don't know if my old truck is worth a set of tires like that. Upon hearing the price, he visibly recoiled, trying not to look shocked. That's a bit more than I was expecting. Lilian's expression didn't change. It's all right, she said softly. We can work something out. You can pay half now and half next month. She then proceeded to walk to the door, peer outside, and call out, Gary, put a Warrior set on Mr. Bradley's truck. She returned to her desk, her movements fluid and graceful. So, she said, settling back into her chair, is there anything else I can help you with, Camden? She looked expectantly at him. He sat up straighter in his chair, trying to regain his composure. How long will it take to get the tires fitted? Lilian glanced at the schedule on her desk. The shop's pretty busy today, so it'll probably be just after lunch. She scrutinized the schedule a second time. Or maybe early after. She paused, considering. You could take a walk into town and do some errands or grab a bite to eat while you wait. Camden grimaced. Walking's a bit of an issue, actually. He couldn't resist the opportunity to share his story. Tore my ACL back in college. Was on track to get drafted into the NFL, you know. Then, bam, one bad tackle, and it was all over. He leaned back, adopting a wistful expression. Still bothers me sometimes, especially on days like this. Lilian smiled politely, offering feigned interest. Camden could tell she had heard this story a million times before, but she played along admirably. That's rough, she said sympathetically. It's a shame to see talent go to waste. She paused, then brightened. Tell you what, since walking's a problem, I can drive you into town proper, take you to a place of your choosing. Camden's ears perked up. Really? You'd do that? Sure, she said casually. I need to run a few errands myself later, so it's no problem. Just give me a few minutes to finish up some things here. Can you wait in the waiting room and decide where you'd like to be dropped off? Camden's mind raced. This was an unexpected opportunity. Time alone with Lilian, outside of the tire shop, could be invaluable. As he walked back to the waiting room, he tried to decide where to go. Should he choose a crowded restaurant, ensuring a public setting? Or should he pick somewhere more secluded, where he could have a better chance of engaging her in a more personal conversation? Lilian's old but well looked after sedan rumbled to life, and they pulled out of the tire shop's parking lot. As they drove towards town, a noticeable shift occurred in Lilian's demeanor. The guarded, almost dismissive attitude she had in the office seemed to melt away, replaced by a more relaxed and comfortable air. She talked casually about the weather, the local gossip, and even some of her more obscure interests. Camden learned that Lilian had a fascination with astronomy and spent her nights stargazing with a telescope she had inherited from her grandfather. She also had a surprisingly extensive collection of vintage postcards. Camden, emboldened by her apparent openness, decided to take a shot. You know, he said, since we both have some time to kill, maybe we could grab a bite together? There's that new burger joint downtown everyone's been raving about. Lilian's smile tightened slightly, and she shook her head. Thanks, but I can't. I have errands to run. But, she glanced at him, a mischievous glint in her eyes. If you're bored, you could always accompany me on my errands. Camden's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't hide his elation, even if he wanted to. Seriously, you'd let me tag along? Why not? She said with a shrug. It's better than sitting around a dusty waiting room with a bunch of old magazines. As Lilian turned onto Main Street, Camden pondered about the errands they might be running. This could be the opportunity he needed to catch Lilian off guard, or to get her in a relaxed enough state that she might slip up and reveal something valuable. Lilian's first stop was the Macon post office, a small, unassuming building on the edge of town. Wait here, she said to Camden, shutting off the engine. I'll be right back. She disappeared inside, and a few minutes later, she emerged carrying a large, brown parcel. She heaved it into the back seat with a grunt. Camden, unable to contain his curiosity, turned to her. "What's in the package?" he asked casually. Lilian glanced at him, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "Just office stuff," she said dismissively. "Don't worry about it." Their next stop was the Pick and Pocket. Lilian pulled into the alley behind the pub. "I'll be right back," she said, grabbing the parcel from the back seat. "You can wait here." Camden watched as she walked towards the back door of the pub. As she reached the door, it opened, and Cassidy appeared. He took the parcel from her, and Camden caught a glimpse of Cassidy closing the door behind Lilian as she walked back to the car. Camden quickly ducked down in his seat, ensuring he wouldn't be seen by Cassidy. He sat up as she got back in the car, trying to appear nonchalant. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Fine," Lilian said shortly, starting the engine. The final step was Mahogany Memories, a large furniture store with several regional branches. This time, Lilian allowed Camden to accompany her inside. The store was filled with the rich scent of wood and polish. Lilian walked directly to the back, where a man with a neatly trimmed moustache and slick back hair approached them. "Lilian, my dear," he said, his voice smooth and oily. "Always a pleasure." "Dave," Lilian replied, her tone neutral. "I need to see you for a moment." Dave Duster, the owner, led her to a small office in the back. Camden lingered nearby, pretending to admire a display of handcrafted tables, but his ears were straining to catch snippets of their conversation. He couldn't make out much, but he saw Dave hand Lilian a thick brown envelope. He also caught Dave's last words as Lilian turned to leave. "I give you my word," Dave said, his expression serious. Lilian returned to Camden, her expression unreadable. "All right," she said. "That's everything. I should head back to the shop." Once they were seated back in the car, Lilian reached across Camden, bracing her weight by placing her hand briefly on his thigh. To reach the glove compartment, the unexpected contact sent a jolt of electricity through him. His heart pounded in his chest, and a flush crept up his neck. It was a brief touch, but it lingered in his mind, a tantalizing blend of warmth and electricity. He suddenly became acutely aware of her scent, that same delicate mix of strawberries and spring flowers, this time around warmer and alive, filling the small space in the car. It was a potent combination that left him feeling flustered and disoriented. He tried to regain his composure, focusing on the road ahead. But the ghost of her touch remained, a distracting reminder of her nearness. He had to keep his head in the game, he reminded himself. This wasn't a date. It was an investigation. Upon arrival back at the shop, Lilian told Camden to go wait in her office. A few moments later, she followed him in, a clipboard in her hand. "All right," she said, her tone businesslike. "They've changed the tires, and while they were at it, they noticed your brake pads were due for replacement. So they went ahead and took care of that too." She rattled off a few more excuses, all designed to justify the increased cost. She presented him with the invoice, pointing to the line where he needed to sign. The total amount was even higher than he had anticipated, thanks to the unexpected brake pad replacement. He swallowed hard, trying to hide his dismay. Camden stared at the invoice, his face contorted into a childlike sulk. The unexpected brake pad replacement, combined with the already exorbitant price of the tires, was a financial blow he hadn't anticipated. He begrudgingly scribbled his signature on the dotted line, his jaw tight with suppressed frustration. Lilian watched him with thinly veiled pity, a playful smile tugging at the corners of her lips. All right, she said, her tone teasing. "I can see you're not too happy about this. How about this? If you make the payment now, you can take me out for dinner on Thursday." Camden's face instantly lit up, the childish sulk vanishing in a flash. He eagerly produced his debit card, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Deal," he exclaimed, handing her the card. Lilian smiled in return, accepting it. As she processed the payment, she said, "My number is on the piece of paper on the dashboard of your truck. Don't forget to call." She handed him back his card and stood up. "Goodbye, Officer Bradley," she said, with a hint of amusement. Camden nervously left the office, his mind racing. He had a date with Lilian. But something about her final words, the pointed emphasis on Officer Bradley, made him uneasy. Was she playing him? Did she suspect something? The days leading up to Thursday crawled by. Each hour an eternity as Camden anxiously anticipated his date with Lilian. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking a tightrope, balancing his genuine attraction to her with his duty to bring down her father. He continued his investigation, subtly probing for information, but he was careful not to arouse suspicion. When Thursday finally arrived, Camden was a bundle of nerves. He left his mother's house, telling her he had a date, but deliberately omitting the name of his companion. Marlene had a tendency of meddling in his personal life, being an only child, and it was far too early in his acquaintance with Lilian to involve her. He arrived at the Rib Eye, the fanciest restaurant in Macomb, a good half hour early. He took a seat at the bar, ordering a drink to calm his nerves, and scanned the room, his eyes fixed on the entrance, eagerly awaiting Lilian's arrival. The restaurant was dimly lit and filled with the murmur of polite conversation. The air was thick with the aroma of grilled steaks and expensive perfume. Camden took a sip of his drink, trying to relax, but his heart continued to pound. He felt like a teenager on his first date, not a seasoned police officer on a potentially dangerous mission. Camden's mind, for once, managed to take a break from work, from Cassidy, from the Marshall case. He let himself get lost in the anticipation of the evening, focusing solely on Lilian. But as the minutes ticked by, his anxiety began to creep back in. 15 minutes past their agreed upon time, then 30. By 40 minutes, Camden was seriously considering calling Lilian, but his pride wouldn't allow it. He couldn't bear the thought of appearing desperate. He began to accept the humiliating reality. He was being stood up. He felt a wave of shame wash over him. Had he misread the signals? Was this all a game to her? As the waitress approached for the third time, her expression a mixture of concern and pity, Camden steeled himself to face the truth. But just as he was about to admit defeat, a soft hand rested on his shoulder. That familiar scent, that delicate blend of strawberries and spring flowers, instantly rushed through his body, and a surge of excitement exploded within him. He fought to maintain his composure, To avoid appearing too eager, he slowly turned around, a carefully crafted smile on his face. Lilian stood there, her eyes sparkling with an apology. He rose to greet her, offering a restrained half-hug, and pulled out her chair with a practiced flourish before settling back into his own seat. "I'm so sorry I'm late," she said, settling in and glancing around the opulent restaurant with a slight frown. Such a horror show. Captain Poopsalot went missing and... "I'm sorry, what?" Camden interjected, his brow furrowed in confusion. "He went missing," she repeated, her tone exasperated. "And we only found him huddled in the attic behind a kist." Camden took a deep breath, trying to process the bizarre explanation. "Who went missing?" he asked, his voice laced with apprehension. "Captain Poopsalot," she said, rolling her eyes. "My cat." A wave of relief washed over Camden, so potent that he nearly sagged in his chair. He couldn't help but chuckle. "Captain Poopsalot," he repeated, shaking his head in amusement. Lilian joined in his laughter, her eyes crinkling at the corners. The tension in the air dissipated, replaced by a shared sense of absurdity. The rest of the evening unfolded like a scene from a romantic movie. They lingered over perfectly cooked steaks, sharing stories and laughter. Lilian's initial aloofness had vanished, replaced by a warmth and vulnerability that drew Camden in. He found himself captivated by her intelligence, her wit, and her surprisingly quirky sense of humor. They talked about their dreams, their fears, and their families, forging a connection that felt both genuine and electric. As the night drew to a close, Camden couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this could be more than just an investigation. Maybe he could have it all. Bring down Cassidy and win Lilian's heart. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Camden noticed Lilian shivering slightly in the cool night air. Without hesitation, he draped his sports jacket over her shoulders. She smiled gratefully, her eyes meeting his with a warmth that sent a shiver down his spine. She also requested a doggy bag, taking her remaining steak and dessert away with her, placing it in a brown bag. When they reached her car, Camden walked her to the driver's side. He leaned in for a hug, and Lilian surprised him by embracing him fully, pressing her body against his. The intensity of the embrace sent a jolt of desire through him, and he struggled to maintain his composure. He opened her car door, holding it for her as she slid into the driver's seat. "Give my regards to Captain Poopsalot," he said, a playful smile on his face. Lilian chuckled, waving as she started the engine and drove off into the night. Camden stood there for a moment, watching her taillights disappear down the street. He was very pleased with how the evening had unfolded. He felt a genuine connection with Lilian, a sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, this could turn into something real. That night, as he lay in bed alone, Camden convinced himself that he was doing all of this not just to uphold the law and bring down Cassidy, but to protect Lilian as well. He told himself that he needed to gain her trust, to save her from what he believed was a life lived under Cassidy's thumb. He imagined himself as her savior, rescuing her from the clutches of her criminal father and leading her to a better life. It was a convenient narrative, one that allowed him to justify his actions and silence the nagging voice in his head that questioned his motives. He drifted off to sleep, dreaming of a future where he and Lilian were free from Cassidy's influence. A future where they could finally be together, without secrets or lies. The next morning, the Macomb precinct was abuzz with a palpable energy. Camden, without expecting to leave the office that day, had donned his full uniform. Partly because he missed the crisp feel of the fabric against his skin, but also because he enjoyed the way it made him feel. Authoritative, respected, a symbol of law and order. He also quite missed the admiring glances it drew from certain members of the public. The commotion in the small 13-person precinct centered around a burglary at Mahogany Memories the previous night. The news hit Camden like a punch to the gut. He was shocked, his mind racing with possibilities. Without hesitation, he raced into Captain Reynolds' office. "Sir, about the Mahogany Memories burglary," he began, his voice urgent. "I need to go down there and question Dave Duster. I have reason to believe he might be involved in something bigger." Reynolds, his face grim, nodded in agreement. "All right, Bradley, go. But take Nancy along." Nancy was a young, new recruit, fresh out of the academy. She was small in frame, but possessed a quick mind and sharp wit, a true asset in such a situation. Reynolds likely wanted a witness, someone to keep Camden in check, given his obvious personal interest in the case. As they drove to Mahogany Memories, Camden struggled to contain his frustration. He felt like he was on the verge of a breakthrough, but the burglary had thrown a wrench into his plans. He needed to talk to Dave to find out what he knew about Cassidy and Lilian. When they arrived at the furniture store, they found the doors locked and the windows dark. A handwritten sign taped to the door read, "Closed for inventory." Camden cursed under his breath. "Looks like we're out of luck," Nancy said, her voice tinged with disappointment. "Maybe we should come back later." Camden rejected Nancy's suggestion with a dismissive wave of his hand. He started banging on the glass door relentlessly, his frustration mounting with each unanswered knock. "Maybe this is a bit excessive, Officer Bradley," Nancy commented, her voice laced with concern. Camden paused only for a fraction of a second, freeing his hand to point at his badge, his gaze fixed on Nancy. The gesture was clear. He was in charge, and she should trust his judgment. Then, without a word, he resumed banging on the glass door, his determination unwavering. It was as if he believed he could will the door open through sheer force. Finally, Nancy spotted someone inside. A figure was making its way towards the door. It was Dave Duster, his face pale and drawn. He fumbled with the locks and chains before finally opening the door. "Officer Bradley," Dave said, his voice trembling. "What can I do for you?" Camden didn't waste any time. He pushed past Dave, Nancy following close behind. "Tell me what happened," he demanded, his voice sharp and authoritative. Dave led them into the store, his hands shaking as he gestured around the showroom. "My safe was cracked," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "and 12 furniture pieces were taken." Nancy, ever observant, chimed in. "Can you show us where those pieces were placed previously?" Dave led them around the store, pointing to empty spaces where furniture once stood. Nancy took meticulous notes, her eyes scanning the surroundings. "Interesting," she murmured. "They were placed quite far apart, in very specific locations." Camden turned to Dave, his expression demanding. "What does that mean?" Dave shrugged, his eyes darting nervously. "I don't know," he stammered. "They were just Some of my most expensive pieces. Camden requested a walk around the premises to see where the burglars might have entered. After a thorough inspection, there was no obvious point of entry that they could discern. No broken windows, no forced locks, nothing. He turned back to Dave, his eyes narrowing. "You're sure there's nothing you're forgetting to tell me?" he pressed, his voice laced with suspicion. "Do you have an alibi for last night?" Dave visibly stutters, his eyes darting around the room as he stammered out an alibi. I was with my wife," he said, his voice wavering. "We were at home watching television. She can confirm it." Nancy, who had been silently observing the scene, scribbled furiously on her notepad, her pen barely touching the paper. Camden nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his business card, and handed it to Dave. "You'll be hearing from me soon," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "And don't leave town." He turned on his heel and marched back to the police cruiser, Nancy trailing close behind. As they reached the car, Nancy started to speak, but Camden quickly hushed her up. "Not here," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I don't want him to hear anything." They climbed into the cruiser, Camden slamming the door shut with unnecessary force. "What do you think?" Nancy asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Do you think he's involved?" Camden started the engine, his jaw tight with suppressed anger. "Do vacuum cleaners suck?" he replied rhetorically, his eyes fixed on the road. They raced back to the precinct, the tires of the cruiser squealing as Camden took the corners too fast. He was eager to share his findings with Reynolds and to formulate a plan of action. They burst into Reynolds' office, their energy palpable. Reynolds leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and gave them his full attention. "All right," he said, his voice deep and gravelly. "Update. What have you got?" Camden paused, gathering his thoughts. "Sir, it's not just about business burglaries anymore," he said, his voice low. "There aren't any actual business burglaries that are happening in the town at all. Nancy, tell him what we got." Camden tapped Nancy's arm, prompting her to speak. Nancy, visibly excited, exclaimed, "It's business fraud, sir. It has to be." Reynolds raised an eyebrow, correcting Nancy with a gruff tone. "You mean insurance fraud, rookie." Nancy's eyes widened with realization. "Yes, sir, insurance fraud." The captain turned his gaze back to Camden. his expression demanding. "All right, Bradley, what's your next move?" Just as Camden was about to answer, a knock echoed on the door. Reynolds, clearly annoyed by the interruption, barked, "What is it?" A young officer, looking flustered, stammered, "Sir, the message is actually for Officer Bradley." He paused, his eyes darting nervously towards Camden's office door across the precinct. "Someone is here to see him." He just points in the direction of Camden's office, not wanting to say who it is. Reynolds, his eyes narrowed, followed the officer's gaze. Camden's heart skipped a beat. Standing by his office doorway was Lilian, her dark hair cascading down her back. She held his sports jacket draped over her forearm. The captain shot a suspicious look at Camden, his eyebrows raised in silent interrogation. Camden cleared his throat, a wave of anxiety washing over him. "Excuse me, sir," he mumbled, avoiding Reynolds' gaze. He left the captain's office, the entire precinct falling silent as every eye followed his every move. He felt like he was walking a gauntlet, the stares of his colleagues burning into his back. He reached Lilian. "Lilian, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. Without waiting for a response, he gently ushered her into his office, his hand lightly touching her elbow. He quickly closed the door and rushed to pull down the blinds, shutting out the prying eyes of the precinct. He gestured for Lilian to take a seat and hastily fixed himself into his chair, his heart pounding in his chest. Lilian smiled playfully, her eyes sparkling. "I just came to return your coat from last night," she said, placing the neatly folded sports jacket on his desk. "And to say thank you again for a lovely evening." Camden struggled to shift gears, to switch from romantic mode to work mode again. He cleared his throat, attempting to adopt a more professional demeanor. "Lilian, I appreciate you bringing the coat back," he said, his voice tight. "But I need to ask you something about last night." Lilian's smile faded, replaced by a look of confusion. "What do you mean?" "Mahogany memories," Camden said, his gaze intense. Lilian's brow furrowed. "Mahogany memories, I don't understand." "The burglary," Camden pressed, his voice rising slightly. "At the furniture store. Do you know anything about it?" Lilian's eyes widened with surprise. "A burglary? No, I haven't heard anything about that. I feel bad for Dave, though." He's a nice man, she added, referencing the time Camden accompanied her to see him on her errand. Camden leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. Lilian, please, you need to tell me everything you know. Anything that might be relevant. Lilian's expression turned to annoyance. What could I possibly know, Camden? I was with you all evening, remember? We were having a nice time until now. She stood up abruptly, her eyes flashing with anger. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice trembling. I can't believe you would think that I had anything to do with this. Camden stood up as well, reaching out to stop her. Lilian, please, just hear me out. But Lilian cut him off, her voice dripping with sarcasm. What? Are you going to Miranda me, Officer Bradley? Camden froze, the blood draining from his face. He didn't respond, his silence speaking volumes. Lilian stared at him for a long moment, her eyes filled with hurt and disappointment. Then, with a shake of her head, she turned and stormed out of his office, leaving him standing there, speechless and ashamed. As she walked out, the entire precinct stared at him through the open doorway, their expression a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and judgment. Even in the throes of righteous anger, Lilian possessed a beauty that could steal a man's breath. Her eyes, usually pools of emerald serenity, now flashed with the fire of a tempest. Yet, even that fury lent them a captivating brilliance. Her dark hair, usually a silken cascade, now framed her face with a wild, untamed grace. Her cheeks flushed a delicate rose, and the rapid rise and fall of her chest beneath her blouse spoke volumes of the tempest within. Verily, even scorned, she was a vision to make the angels weep. Camden stood there, utterly gutted, as he watched her depart. With every step she took away from him, it felt as if a piece of his very soul was being wrenched from his breast. Each footfall echoed in the sudden silence of the precinct, each stride a hammer blow upon his already shattered hopes. He longed to call out to her, to beg her forgiveness, to explain himself. But the words caught in his throat, choked by a mixture of guilt, shame, and a profound sense of loss. He had sought to play a subtle game, to dance on the knife's edge between duty and desire. But he had miscalculated, and now he was paying the price. He had wounded her, betrayed her trust, and in so doing, he had wounded himself. A deep ache settled in his chest, in his heart, a sorrow that threatened to consume him whole. He had jeopardized everything, and for what? A fleeting glimpse of the truth, the desperate hope of saving her from a fate she might not even wish to escape. As the echoes of her footsteps faded away, Camden was left alone in the sterile confines of his office, surrounded by the judging gazes of his colleagues, and haunted by the image of Lilian's beautiful, angry face.